Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with another Kinji Fukasaku deep dive into some more awesome Japanese cinema. I am very close now to the end of this little portion of movies that I've been reviewing leading up to the Battle of Our Honor collection. After this will be two more that I have access to, and then it'll be the short break while we get back into some more awesome Hong Kong cinema, which I know you guys have probably been very anticipating to see which ones I'll be diving into soon. For this one will be a double bill review. Reason for this is because I don't really have a lot to say about Tora Tora Tora, but I'll get into my reasons for that in a minute. So this is basically a double bill of Kinji Fukasaku's war kind of movies, essentially. He did two films within a couple of years of each other. Tora Tora Tora, released in 1970, Under the Flag of the Rising Red Sun in 1972. Two war movies, and it makes sense to put the two war movies he was involved with together as one video, and to kind of, share my thoughts and opinions on this, and to kind of dive into something quite different from this director. Now, starting off with Tora Tora Tora, released in 1970, as mentioned, distributed by 20th Century Fox, a massive, huge undertaking for peak 70s, just kind of like having an ambitious project like this, in the sense of having an American director doing all the American scenes, have Japanese directors to do all the Japanese-based scenes, and do a historical, accurate, to the best of the material that's available. Tells the dialogue that was sent by these commanders, by these people in charge, to show both kind of points of views on this kind of incident that happened at Pearl Harbor, and to show what was happening during World War II in terms of the rising conflicts between Japan and America, and there was backroom deals and alliances and control of information, and this idea of Pearl Harbor being kind of basically a mousetrap, a kind of a sitting duck, essentially, if the Japanese chose to attack. Which, it's interesting to kind of see both kind of sides of the coin, essentially, and what the thinking was during this real life incident that happened many years ago. And it really is, and to the film's credit, almost like a documentary style, and I think that's been compared quite a few times. It is a long movie. It's nearly 3 hours, or a little over 3 hours, and it is an experience to watch, in the sense of a historical kind of factual based movie, which this really did take place, and what was being said and what was being discussed. And it's crazy to think this was a moment of time, and a horrific moment, to say the least, kind of thing, where the Nazis were making potential allies and negotiations with Japan, and there's those kind of talks of Japan invading China, which has been explored within a lot of Hong Kong movies, that Japanese being the true nasty villains during that point, and the British being the sneaky ones. It's quite interesting. In terms of the film itself, in terms of a historical based on these true events, based on the novelization, the books, and the material that was out, fantastic. You're definitely a 5-star all out, I think. In terms of a viewing experience, I think it's good as a one-off, and I would never visit this film ever again. I don't think the film itself is particularly that entertaining, but it's not trying to be. Is it good performances? It's fine from both sides, both the American and the Japanese actors in place. Performances are fine. There's no standout performances. There's no leading man. There's no leading person in this. It's very factual, shot by shot, scene by scene, and it's just extraordinarily well put together, despite the odds going against it between two separate kind of, both were filmed completely opposite ends of each other, and kind of mashing these two films together. Maybe there could have been a little bit kind of better structuring of some of these scenes. Maybe they could have been a little bit more tense. Maybe there could have been a little bit more tension in places. I think it could have been interesting. But in terms of a Kinji Fukasaku effort, I don't really see his identity in this. This is a director for hire yet again. Hey, look, you're a rising star in terms of Japanese cinema. Would you like to collaborate alongside Kiro Kurosawa, which was doing some scenes at the time? I think he might have dropped out during the process of this film, which is why they got him involved. And then you've got collaboration with the Americans and many of the people involved. So it's a big, massive undertaking. It's a really important film in terms of checking out. If you want to not see a documentary, but rather see a theatrical kind of experience, high production film with some recognizable actors from both sides of the coin, I think it's definitely worth it on that front. Definitely worth checking out at least once. But in terms of a entertaining viewing experience, you're not going to get much here. This isn't a shouting match. This isn't a kind of an intense kind of thrill ride, intense music. This is a almost a kind of recreation of those conversations. A lot of scenes in rooms, a lot of desks, a lot of memos being passed around, a lot of conversation about point of views, and that's what the film is. And then it offers that very 70s kind of practical effects with all the plane work and the explosions and the ships and some of the green screens. So it's very early tech in terms of it, but I think it does a really good job ultimately what it's trying to achieve, and it's very faithful to say the least. Now we've got to 2 years later, 1972, with the film Under the Flag of the Rising Red Sun, based on a book, I believe on the same name, I could be mistaken. This was actually nominated to be one of the best foreign films during that time, but was, I think, rejected to be a nomination through various kind of reasons. I'm not too sure why, because this is really goddamn good. And this is Kinji Fukasaku's getting a bit more of a taste for that kind of war movies, essentially. He did his collaboration with Tora Tora Tora, and we know he kind of likes to experiment and likes to do things a little differently. And now this film's storyline and style and kind of structure is very similar to another film called Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa film, which has the same type of idea, this idea of multiple points of views and story of an event that take place. So basically this character is kind of talking to various individuals and they're telling their version of the story. Could be true, could be misleading, it could have elements of lying in there, could be some deception, but it's all different points of views of what happened to this one specific person, and whether they're true or not, whether there's some truth in there or some fabrication, is up to the kind of the viewer to kind of make sense of that, essentially, which I think is quite a unique kind of tool in terms of a storyline, in terms of a story narrative and an engaging film, something that's been kind of mimicked and copied within many, many films since the original outing with Rashomon, and this film plays it to a very high degree within this film, where Kinji Fukasaku does his own take on that idea. This film, I think, is excellent. I was really, really surprised how good this film was, and quite surprised still this doesn't have a good release. It doesn't have a Radiance, it doesn't have a Blu-ray, there's no Arrow version of this film. Definitely very criminal. I think this is definitely one of his better ones in terms of his kind of filmography up to this point. I'd love to own this and revisit this one again. I just think the way this film is kind of structured and kind of stylized within its technical aspects and performances is all really outstanding and really kind of top notch, and just in a really engaging story. As per usual, Kinji Fukasaku, this isn't a happy film, it's a very bittersweet film. There is very little films half the time where he kind of goes out on a kind of a happy note. So always expect that within his movies. If you get something a slightly more happier, then he's in a good mood, I suppose. But that's the kind of the tone he always goes with, that's his style. And with this film, with Under the Flag of the Rising Red Sun, follows a widower, basically, who is, for the past 40 odd years, maybe more, since the end of World War II, since the end of it, since defeat, leading into kind of modern day with the mid 70s, basically has been applying over and over again. Applications have been constantly rejected, to basically trying to find out the truth, what happened to her husband, and trying to seek kind of war bonds, essentially, kind of like, kind of funding to look after the families that basically the soldiers left behind. So basically, if you died in war, you would get something for your family within your wife, your children, and you can claim those benefits. And she was been told that she couldn't seek these benefits and couldn't seek these kind of war bonds, essentially, because her husband was a deserter who was executed and court-martialed, but there is no official documentation placed. There is no kind of record to say who authorized it, what for, what reasons, and basically she couldn't seek any kind of, benefit. So she had to kind of struggle for the very longest time, again, working at the fish ports and docking areas, looking after this child. And then it's a nice little gradual time that kind of takes place towards the first portion of the film, where you see her kind of struggle, her very limited kind of conversations with her husband. She was left pregnant, and then she's been basically defending for herself and her child, up to the point now her child is basically an adult, got married. Financial security could be better, but she's not seeking for the money. She's not seeking for these war bonds. She basically wants to find out what happened, what's the truth. There is no official documentation. And this kind of conversation happens towards the start of the film, this idea of, constant rejection of application over and over and over again. And, there has to be someone left to kind of tell the story. There has to be someone who can clear my husband's name, because he wouldn't be a deserter. He wouldn't just leave his post. There has to be more to this than what happened. And, the banking basically takes pity on her, trying to help her, essentially. They want to get to the bottom of this just as much as she does. They don't want to keep rejecting her. So they basically gave her a list of names that didn't respond back basically through his platoon, essentially. The sergeants and the other comrades in arms that happened, who came back to Japan later on. There was a bunch of names here that didn't respond or didn't kind of reach out. Here's the names. Maybe you can get an answer that you can, and maybe get some closure alongside it. And basically the film is essentially this one woman's kind of journey through these various kind of, comrades in arms, these kind of soldiers that were part of that platoon that knew her husband, who was a sergeant, and basically trying to understand the truth, trying to find out what happened, and get some sort of sense of closure to, because she mentions quite a few times that her husband cannot rest. There is no peace for her or her husband, because there was no answer to this. And I really like this kind of very strong, very independent, self-made woman who basically never got the chance to kind of find out what happened. And then she goes on this journey, and listening to these stories, almost kind of presented, and the technical aspects of it is absolutely extraordinary. It's really fantastic. It's very creative. I would say it's the most creative I've seen Kinji Fukasaku within any film up to this point. He's always this signature kind of, guerrilla style filmmaking. He has his violence. He likes his kind of specific angles, and he likes to have these really nice long takes. And this one, he's really experimenting with color, black and white, experimenting with focus, lenses. He's presenting kind of factual kind of images, actual what happened, and he's presenting kind of fact checking in terms of, where these characters were in terms of the point of World War II, fading out between the characters talking versus going into the past, highlighting key moments. And it's a very experimental, very creative way of telling each kind of soldier's kind of point of view of what happened in this. And it's really kind of fast paced. It's really kind of, it flows really well for an hour-and-a-half movie, and it's very engaging from start to finish. I was really captivated of what happened on this, and becomes a kind of post-World War II thriller drama of the horrors of war, essentially, on what actually happened, and what desperate men would do under a certain situation. And one person says it was a deserter, a kind of leaving his post, who did these really horrible acts, and one person said he went into combat and never came back. And it's trying to put the pieces together. There is some elements of truth between all these stories, and once you highlight the common thread between all these stories, it starts to paint a bigger picture of what actually happened, which I think is extremely impressive. The main actress and protagonist for this film, I can't quite pronounce her name, but she was absolutely extraordinary in this. I think she does a really good job of having your attention within her scenes. I think she definitely carried a lot of weight between her eyes, and I think her facial expressions, even though her dialogue was limited, she really is determined and kind of really kind of going out there and kind of putting herself out there to find out what happened. And I think her performance and her investment to try and find out what happened to her husband is really engaging and really kind of interesting to watch. And I think she does a really good job of capturing the audience. Essentially, she represents the audience in this one, and kind of asking the right questions and trying to figure out, no, you can't, that can't be true, that can't have happened. And you're finding out the shock of the information as much as her, and it's very bittersweet as the film goes along. As again, the Kinji Fukasaku films don't expect a happy movie. Can't really say much else about this film without giving away too many spoilers. I will leave the kind of review on this. Basically, the Under the Flag of the Rising Red song, I think, is an excellent post-World War II thriller that has a really captivating story that mixes between 1940s World War II, what actually happened, the desperations of kind of starvation and blind loyalty, and kind of questioning your superiors. This idea of, that they've lost World War II, they've lost, and this idea of the superiors basically saying, get back out there, we go out fighting, essentially. Some of the kind of more political aspects of, war bonds, and documentations being lost, and fact-checking information, seeing the horrors between all these kind of different stories that these soldiers went through with this kind of sergeant, with the husband, and the horrific tales that did happen during that time, I think is quite interesting, and what some of these men led to. And again, are these stories a reliable kind of storyteller? Are they telling the truth? Is there kind of a slight kind of skew kind of angle that they're kind of keeping back technical aspect, montages, the editing, the style, the black and whites, the music choices, even borderline horror in places, like psychological horror. There's a specific scene where she's kind of rolling around in the sand with the waves kind of hitting her, and that's really kind of intense and really kind of like, you know, shaky. And, you know, I really like the fact that they don't kind of belittle her or kind of downplay her emotions. She's a very capable, self-sufficient woman who's had to raise a child by herself. She's at a point now where she just wants some closure for herself and for her husband, and to find out what's happened. She's never had that within the past 40 odd years, and she's going to get it whether she likes it or not. And I really like that idea. And yeah, as mentioned, it is very bittersweet. It's not particularly a nice, happy ending, but she finds out the truth, and I really like that. I think it's a really good film. I think it's a really interesting style in terms of telling the story, and I think it's a really good performances on play here. And I'm quite surprised he didn't get the nomination for Best Foreign Film during 1972. I think he definitely deserves it for sure, and I definitely hope this will get a good release down the line with Iranians or Arrow or Yūki potentially. This definitely deserves a good HD release with some fresh extras talking about this film for sure. So yeah. So what are your thoughts and opinions on Tora 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 and Under the Flag of the Rising Red Sun? What is your favourite of the two? Please comment down below. Did he do any war movies that I'm unaware of? It may be there's still another 20 odd years of movies that I haven't checked out to see yet. So please comment down below. So in the meantime, guys, I'm for reviews. Signing out.